response video to the Modern Mystic and such. Yeah, I posted a couple of videos. When I'm on an anonymous account, I have to kill that anonymous crap. It's kind of annoying that it doesn't require you to sign in to upload a video, which is kind of stupid. So anyway, I didn't find these two videos of much use. Buckets of Puppets has a nice image, but yeah, I couldn't make much out of either one of the videos. It just seems like you're saying I didn't say something I said pretty explicitly. You want me to put them in buckets? I put them in buckets. I mean, I think sensations are active. They're just stagnant. They don't do anything on themselves. The inputs, the senses are dead. All right, they're just dead input devices. All right, they don't do anything, so they can't be persons. They can't be active players. The only active puppets are reflexes. So until the senses are reflexively interpreted and reacted to, they're of no consequence. They're just crap coming in. So that I don't see any point in making them big dwarfs when they don't do anything by themselves. They're just input devices. They're just cameras. That's all they are, the senses. They're nothing. They're not the compute. This is not a computer. Okay? This is the computer. So I thought I made that semi-clear. And I also talked about the difference between thoughts, feelings, like emotions, let's call them emotions to separate them, and then feelings. And feelings is something that's happening throughout the whole structure. Feeling is like a sense. It's like the sixth sense or the seventh sense, however you want to describe it. And it's something that's coming in through all the camera is picking up the sensations. Everything's being absorbed, consumed. When that happens, when the lava starts penetrating, it breaks down the whole structure. The whole structure reacts to the lava. And so that was why I used that analogy, is that the threat is made out of some other mechanism in terms of the real composition of it. But the threat type, the fact that it can consume the whole stage is on fire. The theater is on fire. When hard pain or suffering is taking place, there is no performance anymore. There's no puppets and strings and shit going on anymore, because the whole thing starts to break down because the theater is on fire. So anyway, let's see, what else can I say to this? So anyway, I'll try a new tact. And I guess there's no point also in always, you said you're going to let go of the stupid it all doesn't mean anything thing. And you're sort of dragging that back in, and now you're going with okay, it's all one thing. I just don't see the point in saying it's all one thing when we can identify distinctions ourselves. We can see the distinctions. We can feel. I mean, the difference between a thought and a feeling is a difference I recognize. That's why I call one a thought and why I call the other one an emotion. I mean, I can't see any point in saying it's the same thing when it's obviously has a difference to it. My brain can sense the difference. It can put them in categories. It can put them in buckets. I just don't see why you're saying take them out of the buckets, because the distinction isn't really there. Okay, but I don't see any reason to do that, because the distinction is one I can qualitatively sense, and I can see it in the structure. Like I said, I can think in some kind of passive ways where I'm completely absorbed just in the imagination of my thoughts. And all I have is conceptions running, and my senses, the cameras, everything starts to shut down. The whole theater gets quiet and dark, and the spotlight gets more and more bright. I mean, that kind of syndrome is a real syndrome, and you can't just say it's all the same thing, because it's not the same thing now. The spotlight is in one place. The focus. But maybe it's just semantics, and we're just talking past each other because we're saying at what point does it become a different thing? It obviously starts off as the same thing. It's obviously made out of the same brain. But then again, I want to tie this also to evolution and the fact that how would this brain develop? And I'm going to argue, I'll go back to my reptile, ape, human thing, that this evolved on layers on top of simple structure. One would theorize, that the add-ons weren't completely fundamental changes. They were attachments. And so, the underlying mechanism is probably crude, the reflex. That's what I've basically said. It's all just reflexes, all right? But it's definitely reflexes doing different things, creating different kinds of conscious experience. All experience is not the same. All sound that comes out of a speaker is not the same. Some of the sound is incredibly dirty. Some of it's completely pure, one frequency. It comes in variants that we can identify the difference between them. And I guess I would sort of argue that when a speaker is caught up in a feedback loop and is making a hideous screeching sound, that might be applicable or comparable to what happens inside our brain when pain takes over. Is that there's this feedback loop and it just becomes this hostile, harsh, grady noise producer. It's no longer sensing the world. It's no longer functionally reacting. It's no longer doing anything useful. It's not playing the tape anymore. It's creating more noise than signal. And that when that happens in our brain, we call that suffering. I think those are reasonable metaphors. So anyway, I did a little bit of thinking and drawing. Hopefully this will be viewable to some extent. It was just really, what I got to do is we got to go, make the list of all the conceptual terms, pattern recognition, all the little, cognitive dissonance, all the little kinds of terms that go on, and put them in their place and order them. But some of this might be of value because this is my initial conception. So I just drew this up, and so what it basically represents is you have the 5 senses that we identify, and that they're sensing the environment. And all of that information is going into this thing we call our consciousness. And it goes in directly. But we, as stated, we have a reflexive response to it through our subconscious, and that feeds right back into our own senses. Our behavior feeds back in, and over time, things can bounce around inside of this conscious box for quite a while, and then 2 days later, it can pop back out to be fed back into the system again. So what I was having here, this was my the only value I pulled out of this particular drawing was the fact that you do have this little thing, this little red button, this little nasty button, and let's say that your initial state is the button's halfway in, and that's the irritation button, the repulsion button, the negative energy button, whatever you want to call it, and that your brain controls that button, releasing it and causing the sensation of relief or pleasure, and pushing it in further, causing this lava sensation, this burn the theater down type stuff. But that's the little kernel. That's the first ouch took place with some little mechanism like this. And all the other ouches that we've built out of all the emotions, all the guilt, all the other crap that we pile on top of that is just something pulling on the strings of that little ouchie button in nuanced and complex ways. Maybe at a high, if it turns the switch on off really fast, it's one kind of feeling. And if it turns the switch off really slow, it's another kind of feeling. There's ways for that simple binary to be manipulated where you can get a lot of nuance out of it because of just how you control how it's poked. You can poke things in a lot of different ways. You can poke it hard, or you can poke it slow and soft, or there's lots of different ways you can poke something. And that's how it creates the illusion of different sensations. So anyway, what else do I want to say about that? But yeah, there's little dotted lines that connect all the senses to that little button, because they all can create something called irritation, that's almost instantaneous, that's reflexive. A sound can be harsh. You don't have to think about it. It just hurts. You can have blinding light that hurts your eyes. You can have a foul taste that's immediately reactive. The same with a smell. And obviously with sensation. You can have sensations, that are just, you automatically react to them. They're automatically irritating. repulsive. So there's this connection between the senses that go through this direct net, and then the subconscious net, and then finally what leaks into consciousness, mainly dominated by these sense inputs. So that's the dominant structure, and it's only when this is on full, or this button is getting pressed hard, that this starts controlling the consciousness. All right. And I put this is the sense of touch here, and I put that next to this thing because there is this connection between the feel sensation and this repulsion, this pain, this negative sensation. That's the sense that's closest to that one, just as vision and sound is the closest to our consciousness. All right, so enough for that drawing, and now we'll work on this one, which is much simpler. Yeah, sorry, I should have done this better. You really can't read any of this probably. But anyway, it's just a funnel. Alright, and the inputs come in. This is our sense data. And our brain just produces the action. So when we act, when we reflexively react, so we can have a knee-jerk, or we can have a slower, more thoughtful reaction of an emotional feeling, or we can actually do something like move my finger or point or do some other kind of thing, and that's an automatic action, but it's all fed back into our consciousness. We reinterpret it as part of reality. What we do is part of our reality. What we feel is part of our reality. What we think is part of our reality. So all that stuff, the thoughts and the feelings, here they are here, they get fed right back into our consciousness to be reabsorbed, to be re-eaten, reprocessed through something that's just a reflex. It's a reflex jerk brain. Well, I wrote that. It's kind of a stupid way to put it. But anyway, that's all it's doing. It's a reflex jerk. We call it the brain. But it's just a bunch of reflexive reactions that create these nuances of different kinds of composition. But it is different kinds. Like I said, a chain of thought is incredibly different than some kind of vague emotional, like sadness, or even this, it's hard for me to even describe some emotions because I have become kind of distant to most of them, except for anger. But yeah, I mean, anger has a completely, when I'm angry and I'm pissed off, I mean, it's a completely different thing. You can just feel the chemistry of it, the adrenalness of it, it's just it's just adding more, it's pouring more gasoline on the fire, or however we want to describe it. And this stuff is the nuance of the fire. This is the minerals in the fire. This is the thing burning with different colors and flashes and sparks. This is just fuel. This is just the motivator again. This is the motivator, and this is the more elaborate processor. This is the nuancer. This is the thing that makes the feedback really valuable, because it keeps creating a new world that we live in. Alright, so think, feel. So I thought an important concept here is the fast and slow part. There's these automatic reflexes, these automatic quick responses, and then the brain can take a real long time. Things can go down a long whirlpool for even decades, and then they'll pop back into that feedback loop finally as some sort of new processed spam, to be consumed and mixed with the current reality, the current inputs that are just constantly coming in. So another concept I had, so you have a fast reaction, then you have a slower, and it's almost infinite. And then I pointed out at the end of my other video too how, I think I've used this metaphor a couple of times, that you could think of thinking and feeling as being part of a grid work, and that the feelings are going in this direction and thinking is the horizontal or the vertical, and that they have these connection points. And it's almost like you could even use Einstein's space fabric, and you could say that a conception is a dimple in that space, and it pulls both on your emotions and on connected thoughts, and brings things closer and changes how the things connect over in this other space, because it stretches the fabric, or it pulls on different reflexive nodes. But I mean, there's all kinds of ways to work with that kind of the idea of a grid. But I'm definitely going to argue that the things we have the things we have stored as thoughts and feelings, these things are stored as a mixture. I think it was perfectly valid to say there's two kinds of dwarfs inside of our head. These simplistic, reflexive, emotional reactions, and these much more elaborate, much more complicated conceptions and logic and sentence construction. These things are infinitely more complex than these crude, silly, stupid feelings. These feelings are always the same kind of bullshit. They don't change much over time. Guilt you feel at 17 isn't any more elaborate than the guilt you feel at 45 in terms of a sensation, where your thoughts become much longer and bigger and richer and much more connected to other thoughts and much more refined, and all the noise, like with the speakers, all the noise is filtered out, and the logic gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. It's what our brain is doing, is it's processing. It's cleaning this grid work. It's taking all the old wasted strings, wasted connections, or however you want to describe it, and it's taking all the fuzz out of the logic, to become. It's basically converting complex ideas into almost an automatic reflex. So now even when you hear a word, like I hear the word philosophy today, my brain reacts entirely different than it would have reacted when I was 20. All right, it's learned what that word means in a much more specific and pointed and way than it did then. And that's just the honing. Your brain is honing these conceptions over time. It's polishing your ideas, your principles. It's all getting polished by a kind of logic grit, where logic is the thing rubbing all the crap off, because it's finding that cognitive dissonance, that conflict between two statements in your brain, and it's saying you've got to resolve that, and so it experiments and plays with it, and it finds out which one is bullshit, and it starts rubbing the bullshit off. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know where to go. Like I said, the thing that has to be done. There's no point in doing the dwarf thing if the end game is, you're still going to go for some sort of. It's just the universing thing. I just can't find the point in going there. Because the metaphor isn't going to be suitable to defeat that argument. There's some other argument I got to make. An argument. About our evolution and about the physical structure, to do something with that. But yeah, I just don't see any point. Again, I don't know why you discount personal sense data. You just do it all. You do. This is the fundamental premise of your argument, that all our personal sense data that we gather by being conscious is somehow irrelevant. The fact that I can see the difference between red and blue indicates that there must be something different about red and blue light. I didn't make the difference. My brain doesn't create the difference. The difference exists in the light itself. The light that's red and the light that's blue is different. And I'm identifying, I'm recognizing the difference. And when our brain, our consciousness is doing something, I can identify it as a feeling and I can identify that as a thought. There's no reason for me to assume there's no distinction between those things. That somehow my brain is just making it up and saying, well, here's the difference. It's just an artificial difference. No, there's something different about them. That's why they're different. That's why I can identify them as red and blue, is because they're different things. And, there's just a difference between being dead when I'm asleep and being conscious. Being completely incapable of suffering and suffering. These are different things. I can identify the difference between something that is insentient and something that is sentient, and I can identify the fundamental difference being is this thing can't be harmed, and this thing fucking can. And why would I sit there and say, that's just bullshit, that's just some notion in my head? No, the difference is quite the fuck obvious. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting pissed, but it's just, I just, you know, to have to defend, you know. Well, I guess there's nothing wrong. I mean, you know, you're obliging me to defend it, so I'll have to defend it. I have to come up with the logic to defend it, and so I'm going to have to keep making little statements like the one I just made, trying to explain how what we sense is not illegitimate, how it is not a non-event. It is an event. It is a function of the nuanced psychology that it creates this manifestation of consciousness that we experience. We're experiencing it. It's just, I just don't see how you can discount it as nothing when we're experiencing it. My own testimony, my own experience is telling me I'm alive, I'm conscious, I feel. And these are all significant facts. They're not nothing, they're something. I've identified them. I've pointed my finger at it and said it's fucking red. And it's red for a fucking reason. Sure, let's explain why it's red. But it's just a fucking fact that there's a difference between red and blue. And there's a difference between dead and alive. And there's a difference between feeling and not feeling. Yeah. So anyway. So, let's see where we go from here. But, I mean, I think, you know, your video, you basically said, well, you're going to have to do, and I already did it in my video. I mean, I think I pretty much said it. All right? I think the feeling pains, the ones that give qualitative texture to things, the good and bad feelings, those are structural. The repulsion and attraction, positive, negative, comforting, discomforting, those concepts are structural. The puppets can manifest, the emotional puppets. They're on the floor, like I said before, so they're closer to that network of feeling. And so they're animations, they're extensions of that feeling ability. But they are nuanced and perverse and strange, because they take something that's just a feeling and they give it this weird grayness, you know, where it's like half good and half bad. You know, they give you sensations that are half of a button press. You know, they poke the button in a nuanced way. They poke at the walls. You know, they create the damage in subtle ways that they play with that feeling surface, that feeling environment, that feeling foundation. And the thinking guys are just completely separate from almost all of it. They have a little bit of connection to these emotional guys, these little strings of connection, but they can do their business completely independent of all the emotional crap and even the physical crap, as long as it's not too harsh. So as long as the pain isn't vibrating the whole floor and they can't read their books anymore, or they can't talk without their teeth shattering, the little thinky guys will do their thinky crap. You know, the concept manipulation is definitely, in my opinion, a separate engine from the emotional engine. They're just two different engines. It's not the same motor. There's two different engines. One is moving the arm of the crane, and one is moving the wheels of the crane. Something like that. All right. Enough of a video. Till next time. Yeah, it's going to require some writing up and doing stuff, because, like I said, you just can't keep doing it in some kind of pull out of the ass manner. This is going to have to get structured if we're going to get into this kind of degree of nuance about making these distinctions between these things and what their function is and how they evolved. And, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, it's not. It's sort of brain science. You know, it's not something you can just pull out of your ass. It's like kind of doing the quanta thing. I think the mechanism is simple. I think it is diagrammable, but it takes a while to get through all the layers of uncertainty and blurry images. You have to look at a lot of blurry images before you can finally figure out that it's not Sasquatch. You know, it's just your neighbor taking the garbage out. So anyway. Till next time.